As his fears became more overwhelming, it was easier for Palpatine to manipulate him. This is the key to what makes Anakin not a Mary Sue, his fall to the dark side. He was tricked into serving the Empire as a result of not being able to manage his emotions.
Fuck, I was hoping to skip this bullshit. Alright, I'll address this more in a moment, but I mean, that doesn't really mean anything. He can turn the dark side and still be a Mary Sue. That just means he's a Mary Sue that's a villain protagonist. TV Tropes actually has a term for this. It's called Villain Sue, for fuck's sake. The source you keep using for the meaning of these terms? God damn it.
And if you really think Anakin is a Mary Sue because of his high midichlorian count, you should also think that Rey is a Mary Sue because her midichlorian count has to be like 10 million.
So let's take this at face value on its own. Your entire point is to say that Rey is a Mary Sue, and the counterpoint is to compare past protagonists to say that she isn't. Pointing out Anakin's high midichlorian count is a good point to make, because it indicates that Rey being powerful in the Force naturally is more of a trait of a protagonist of the series in general than simply her being a Mary Sue. Alright, so saying Rey's a Mary Sue because she also has this trait proves absolutely nothing in terms of this argument. Saying how similar they are in this way still creates the trap of either both of them are Mary Sues or neither of them are. But of course, that's not the phrasing of your argument. The phrasing of your hypothetical counter-argument was the counter being Anakin Skywalker is a Mary Sue because of his midichlorian count with no qualifier. If your whole point is to say that Rey is a Mary Sue, why does this matter to you? They can both be Mary Sues for that reason, and it doesn't hurt what you're saying at all.
And as for that pod race or the incident with the Trade Federation, Anakin didn't do that on his own. He had illegal help in the pod race, so he technically cheated in some aspects in order to win.
And his rival, whose name I'm not even gonna fucking try with because I'm lazy, yeah, he totally didn't sabotage Anakin's pod racer before the race. And the Raiders were also shooting at him during the race, so was it really him having help? Especially since one of the things you're comparing this to is Rey literally have someone fight Kylo with her?
On top of that, Anakin was established to be skilled in mechanics and machinery at a young age, and that's because he was an inventor in his time as a slave. He had to build machines and other contraptions at work, so there's a legitimate explanation for how he won the race.
Which is also something you can say about Rey. Sure, she's not actively shown to be an inventor, but at that point, you're really grasping at straws to say that Rey's a Mary Sue for the two having a similar skill set, which is what all of these things are, really. In fact, I kind of want to address the argument tactic you're using here. More importantly, I want to dive into this whole compartment of counter-arguments. See, there's a difference between compartmentalizing reasoning in order to address something properly when someone is trying to confuse the discussion by making multiple points at once. Your language, however, suggests that each of these things is its own individual proof. That without the others, it can still be proof in and of itself when that's, well, a dishonest way to present your argument. You prove the individual points correct and admit when there is a valid counter-argument, but by pointing out other things being invalid, you dismantle the counter-argument while still being willing to acknowledge your own argument's flaws. It does two things. One, it actually creates a discussion instead of two people shouting into the void, and two, it makes you come across less like a bitch. Which is how I know you're never going to fucking do it.
And in the battle with the Trade Federation, Anakin wasn't piloting that ship on his own. He was getting help from R2-D2. If it wasn't for R2, Anakin would have been killed.
Hey, you know how Han Solo was also fucking piloting the Millennium Falcon when she first piloted it? Also, fun fact, yeah, about that Starfighter thing. You mean the autopilot, right? The thing he turned off right before he accidentally blew up the control ship? It may have been one moment of being straight up better at fighter pilot maneuvers than entire fleets of well-trained soldiers, but fuck, if Rey being lucky counts for you, then so should Anakin being lucky, right?
He didn't accomplish any of these things by himself, so using them as proof he's a Mary Sue is null and void. If he was a Mary Sue, his skills in these situations would have been unrealistic, but his skill set was reasonable because of his job repairing and fixing ships. Additionally, Anakin wasn't liked by everyone instantly.
I just realized, why the fuck are we talking about why Anakin's not a Mary Sue again? Isn't the whole point of this that Rey is? And you're really just providing fodder for why Rey isn't. I'm skipping until you talk about something actually related to the movie you're supposed to be talking about.
Rey has hardly faced anything that affected her long term.
Okay, so I could list examples of the various forms of emotional manipulation and whatnot that she has to deal with, but you decide to make your statement completely meaningless by saying hardly, so that you can just counter anything I say with that's not much. But based on what you've said about other characters, yeah, sorry she didn't get physically mutilated and maimed like Luke and Anakin did. I'm sure Disney will make sure they chop off the protagonist's dick next time. Even though it sounds like that's your exact problem, but we're not on your Kathleen Kennedy section yet.
She's never disliked by anyone except the villains.
Whoops, forgot your weasel words to make sure you're not stating an absolute. Yeah, Luke. Luke doesn't like Rey when he meets her. Poe also doesn't like Rey during a decent amount of the first movie, people tolerating one another like you described Qui-Gon and Anakin incorrectly doing counts. Han was just confused by Rey's very fucking existence. So, you know, you're still pretty wrong, even if you remembered your weasel your way out of a black and white statement.
She didn't go through decades of training, she doesn't know anything about the Force except for a 1-minute meditation session.
Except she already knew she could move shit with it before that. And she also did other training, a significant amount of which could be off-screen. Force osmosis basically just makes her a quick study, which is probably something the guy that was guiding that meditation session would know a thing or two about, wouldn't you say? Yeah, where's Luke's decades of training in the OT again? Oh, yeah, right, I'm sorry, I forgot. Most of it was an off-screen Holocron Skillshare subscription with promo code BANTHATITTIES at checkout. Oh, and since Rise of Skywalker counts for this, even though it's a less Jedi review, how about that year with Leia, huh? By the way, Bantha Titties is not a real Skillshare subscription code. Don't use that. Please don't say that I gave you a Skillshare code that doesn't work. Please.
She's not consumed with fear, and she's never in danger of dying or suffering from a long-term injury.
So, what do you think would have happened if she didn't run after her fight with Kylo? What do you think would have happened if Finn didn't pick up the fight in Kylo with the first movie? What about if Kylo didn't turn on Snoke? What about if Snoke didn't trust Kylo to kill Rey? In fact, what do you think would have happened if Palpatine lured her into a Oh, wait! That's right!
The main difference between defending Luke and Anakin and defending Rey is that when people defend Luke and Anakin,
they're defending someone with a penis?
They're actually defending Luke and Anakin.
Nah, I'm pretty sure my version's still right.
When people defend Rey, they're not defending Rey. They're only defending some made-up ideology or victimhood they think they're arguing for. It's why one of the responses to calling her a Mary Sue is to claim you're being sexist. But after putting more thought into it, the main reason why Rey is a Mary Sue is because of her gender.
So, your response to someone calling you sexist for saying that Rey is a Mary Sue is to just have a sexist reason for her to be a Mary Sue. Bruh.
Really think about it. Luke was constantly under threat of physical harm and death, and he gets his ass kicked consistently throughout the OT. You related to him, and you feared for him, because the movie showed you that his natural connection to the Force didn't make him immune to danger. But as a result of Kathleen Kennedy demanding that women be as superior and unstoppable as possible, Rey being female directly impacts her negativity as a character. Kennedy isn't going to allow a movie where the female protagonist gets beaten and brutalized like Luke and Anakin were.
In fact, more named female characters die or are severely injured in this movie than men. So how exactly is this feminist propaganda? See, here's the thing. Normally this is the part of the video where I would list a whole bunch of shit that proves you wrong, but, well, I will make my point much better with precisely 3 examples. The color purple. You've heard of this one, right? Whoopi Goldberg, Oprah. The female protagonist is a victim of child abuse that's shown, along with attempted rape. This is a child in the first, 30 minutes of the movie? Yeah. Kathleen Kennedy produced that. But she was an executive producer on that. Now, was she? I mean, she wasn't on Star Wars either, but don't worry, I got you covered. How about Cape Fear? Female lead is, well, if you've seen Cape Fear, you know what happens in that movie. I'm not going to go into it, although I already alluded to a similar situation happening in The Color Purple. But, yeah, Kathleen Kennedy is credited in that movie as executive producer. But those are old movies. Me and my accursed boomer brain. What about the girl on the train then? Drunken binges, waking up covered in blood after a blackout. That's a very dark movie. Now, you may notice a lot of the movies I spoke of focus more on psychological trauma than the removal of limbs. No, I'm not going to let that go. That's because this, in particular, lines up with what Rey dealt with in the trilogy. And, fun fact, someone dealing with psychological torture can be way more effective a narrative device than just saying, you don't have a hand now because you're required to suffer. Except you still have a hand because we have cybernetics. Hell, you even brought up an example of psychological trauma you thought should have been included in the movie with saying Finn should have sacrificed himself. But no, Kathleen Kennedy would never put a female protagonist in harm's way. Unless her name was Holdo, of course. Not that she would... You know what? Forget it. You have a whole section on this. I'm just going to save it.
She never loses a limb, she's never force choked, and while she was restrained by Kylo, she's never assaulted and never suffers any lasting wounds in the same vein as Kylo getting a scar on his face.
Once again, oh boo-hoo, she doesn't lose a limb. Yes, clearly the only way for a character to develop is physical disfigurement. Are you aware of how full you shit you are right now? Based on how many times I've been saying this, I'm guessing not.
The only other instance you can argue with is when she's being subdued by Snoke, and even then she quickly recovers from it.
And the same happens with people who get force choked as long as they don't get force choked to death. Yet, you listed that as one of the things that was important. She is clearly in immense physical pain during the majority of that, and even if it's not shown, you don't have the show a bloody wound in order to display pain. And there's a thing called adrenaline. Perhaps you're not aware because you've never suffered an injury in your life. I have, but a lot of the time, people are capable of pushing past injury temporarily because of adrenaline pumping and essentially numbing the pain. I had this happen to me in high school. I was hit by a car. I broke my collarbone. I thought I landed on my feet. No, I just popped back up. I was looking for my glasses, and then people told me, get down on the ground, you dumbass, and my leg was shredded cheese.
If the protagonist is never in any true danger, you can't fear for them. And Rey is never in any true danger because Kennedy wants her to be protected at any cost. Kennedy views Rey as a means to promote feminism, while not caring about her development as a character, so she can't fall into any harm because that would make women and girls look weak and vulnerable. She's made too powerful after very little experience, and because her character is never in danger of serious injury or death, there is no tension. Kennedy has this really screwed up idea that feminism automatically equals equality, but the way she uses Rey to promote it isn't even close to what can be considered equality. This isn't equality, it's pandering.
Oh, weird. I thought this was a section about Rey. Funny how you just change topics on the fly. So, I have a question for you. If a male lead character suffered very little physical harm during the course of a trilogy, then would you find that character to be a Mary Sue as well? If so, then why isn't Captain Kirk a Mary Sue? Yes, Captain Kirk. Never undergoes physical harm in a long-term sense like you're talking about. No scars, nothing. Now, this becomes really interesting when it comes to the Kelvin trilogy. It's still a trilogy until 2023, shut up. I'm pretty sure this will come out before then. You know who either directs or produces the entire Kelvin timeline? J.J. Abrams. Mission Impossible is also a series where the main character also does not receive actual physical harm very often. And who's been involved with them since the third movie? J.J. Abrams. So, Miss Anthropony, are you sure the stylistic component of seemingly invincible protagonist is something intended for feminist purposes? And even if it is, are you sure that's coming from a person who has a lot of psychological thrillers on her resume? Are you sure about that?
And when you think about it, it's actually pretty toxic. I don't particularly think telling young girls that they can be awesome, powerful, beloved, and successful with little effort just because they're female is exactly a healthy message to send. Characters like Goku and Superman work their asses off to perfect new techniques and learn new abilities to become better fighters.
You did not just say that Superman works for his shit. The pinnacle of everything he's got coming from the circumstances of his birth, and you want to say this is a character that works his ass off to get better? No. Any other character, and yet you go with Mr. My Son's a Different Color, wahoo Jimmy, fuck all the way off a cliff.
They had to train long and hard in order to be strong enough to fight villains like Frieza and Darkseid.
And now you done fucked up with DBZ2. Goku's training is not what lets him beat Frieza. Like any other villain, Nappa, Vegeta, Raccoon, Captain Ginyu, Boo, I would even give you most of GT, but Frieza? Okay, so here's the thing. Goku's training doesn't mean shit against Frieza. Frieza, in case you forgot, was bitch smacking him left, right, center, top, up, down, bottom, left, Konami code. Until Frieza killed Krillin. Then he went Super Saiyan for the very first time and only had any struggle because Frieza used a technique that didn't really give a shit about power levels. And keep in mind, there was somebody in the Frieza fight that actually was trying to train himself to become Super Saiyan, and he got fucking killed. So no, training to combat Frieza wasn't fucking it, Chief.
Rey doesn't train long and hard. She just downloads it from other people's brains.
Superman doesn't train long and hard either. He just stays away from green rocks and eats his yellow sun juice. What's your fucking point? Midoriya in My Hero Academia has an encyclopedic knowledge of heroes and their quirks. He still has to figure out how to use that in the heat of the moment. He has one for all, but especially early in the series, he figures out methods to work around his limitations with it while he's training his body to be able to handle it. And half the time, he comes up with that shit on the fly. There are plenty of series where training is kind of pointless and it becomes all about what someone does in the moment. You're mad? Because you don't get the training montage, and that's it, my guy.
Some people have argued that the reason for Rey's power is because she's a dyad in the Force made to counter Kylo and balance things out, which is a stupid excuse. First of all, I don't recall Luke being a dyad in the Force to counter Anakin.
It's almost like those are different stories. It's almost like Rey and Kylo being a dyad are... It's just something that's true and confirmed? Like, are you saying it's not? So the novels mean nothing to you if they outright prove the reason that she's able to keep up with Kylo then?
And second, that's just a cop-out that was never explained in the films themselves. It wasn't even a thing until The Rise of Skywalker, where it's only briefly mentioned as part of damage control.
It's not like the characters knew before Rise of Skywalker. This is something that was actually hinted at throughout the trilogy and not outright explained, because the outright explanation was not necessary for people with functioning brains until the very end. The characters didn't know the outright explanation until the end, and your only response is basically just nuh-uh at the thought of something that was intended that proves you wrong!
Rey is not a character you can relate to because there's nothing about her that's believable. The only thing that can even be considered something she struggles with is seeking a parental figure in her life, which is why she's trying to find her parents. But when she's told by Kylo that she's a random nobody who was abandoned for drinking money, she goes back to being cheerful and bubbly in the next scene she appears in. She has an upset look on her face for about 20 seconds, and that's precisely it. That's not struggling with your emotions. That's dropping your ice cream on the floor and just going to buy a new one.
Hey, did you know that a character can feel emotions and fucking repress them in a given moment, or possibly do something that they can enjoy in order to cope? And that next scene is several minutes later, when her resolve to fight against Kylo was strengthened and she had a chance to move from the initial shock. We don't even know how long that was in universe, long enough for the fighting to start on the planet. And it's not like she's taking out her aggression and her emotions on the enemy. Nah, she's just energetic about taking down people who are ready to murder the closest thing she had to friends in her life. Like, sometimes you focus your emotions into what you're doing and come out productive. Have you never done that? Wait, I'm talking about Miss Anthropony. Of course you're not a productive member of society.
And even if this was supposed to affect her character in some way, the argument is rendered invalid when the next film comes along and retcons her backstory. And aside from her power level and bland personality, she doesn't bring anything new to the table. She goes through the same journey that Luke went through, and there's no major difference in what happens between them. Growing up on a desert planet, becoming a pilot, seeking adventure out in the galaxy, discovering she has long-lost family, offering herself to the villain to try and redeem them, training under a legendary warrior in self-opposed exile, being offered to rule the galaxy alongside the Dark Apprentice after killing the main antagonist. I got pages of these, I can go on.
Okay, so while you're sort of correct to point out that Luke and Rey's story follows a very similar overall path, you've used what you consider to be major differences to justify why Rey is a Mary Sue and why Luke isn't. So saying this here really just blows a giant hole in your argument that you've gone on for what's really going to wind up being, what is it, like 30 minutes? But here's where the sort of comes in. All right, let's ignore the fact that several of these events happen in different acts of the story with Rey, or how several of these beats you're talking about are set up very differently, or happen in a different order, or how the last one is an incorrect description of what happens in the original trilogy on several levels. because you can just deflect any criticism of your points that I make by calling what I have to say minor with no evidence of your own rather than your opinion. So, let me rebut that statement directly. Let's see. Little orphan gets raised by relatives in solitude, suddenly gets taken under wing of funky wizard dude, learns that he's been destined to have powerful gifts. Yeah, funny how one of your examples does the exact same shit. I mean, sure, you can try to say it's a different franchise, but it's still the same basic story being told twice, and Rey had a lot more differences than Harry, like motivation and integration. You forgot that Rey was wary. She was thrown into that like Luke jumped right in. I think the fact that you dismiss that proves you can't assess shit. Fact is, the same beats can make a very different story. You know, like I did with ERB when they started this point for me.
Characters need flaws, development, and interesting personality to make them compelling. Rey doesn't have any of these things no matter how you slice it.
Okay, other than you just literally saying your opinion is better than other people's, and the fact that I've proven this statement wrong several times by now, and the fact that the way you structured this point gave me whiplash to the 3rd degree, let's talk about Rey's abandonment issues, which is just outright proves this entire statement wrong by way of them developing over the course of the story, and is actually a really interesting aspect that you completely ignored the existence of, because apparently that's not interesting to you. To do so, I'm going to talk about the story arc from the perspective of the 5 stages of grief, and how Rey is grieving over her parents during this film. In most of the first movie, Rey is in a state of denial. She believes her parents are coming back for her, and that's why she doesn't want to leave. During the course of the first movie, we see that denial turn towards anger towards them. There's moments of sadness over that, sure, but the stages of grief are more of an overarching thing than a direct correlation to every emotion you feel. So her anger is represented more prevalently at her reaction to the death of her seeming new father figure, Han Solo. She goes after him and fights him. She battles him in anger. One could even view Kylo as a representation of her anger at this stage, given the fact that they are a dyad in the Force. In fact, it does seem like what Kylo Ren represents as a whole in this context, the stages of grief over her parents. By the 3rd movie, she may have accepted that they aren't coming back for her, but this is where the bargaining comes into play. She feels they must be important people, is convinced of the weight of knowing who she comes from. Kylo Ren, in turn, represents a person to bargain with. Someone who can tell her the truth. When she finds out the truth, at least as it was given in the 2nd movie, this leads towards her depression. Depression she masks when lives are on the line because, you know, people can do that. And that manifests more fully in, again, Kylo Ren, who is the one that tells her of her Palpatine heritage. People talk about the whole fetishizing abuse thing, but Kylo in the 3rd movie is oppressive and trying to drag her towards darkness that she feels within her, because that's what depression does in this case. It drags us to our darkest thoughts, and it's only when that depressive state fades away that we can find acceptance. Rey accepts who she is at this point and doesn't need to worry about who she comes from. I have issues with parental abandonment, specifically my dad, so I know this arc all too well. That's probably why I can resonate with it and find it interesting more easily than you can. Not that I'm going to tell you what your home life was like, but I'm simply guessing based on the fact that you don't get it. Oh, by the way, my whole spiel here, that makes your next point look real sus.
Remember the mirror scene? That scene is actually the biggest evidence that she's a Mary Sue. I looked it up. It's actually based on the trial Luke had in episode 5. The trainee enters a place strong with the dark side, and the Force manifests a vision of their fear and weakness. For Luke, it was his desire to defeat Darth Vader, leading him to becoming like him, creating a path of self-destruction. For Anakin, it's his lust for power that will consume everyone he loves and eventually himself. For Rey, it seems to be seeing herself as she is, which I guess ties into her fear of not having a family, which means nothing since it doesn't affect her after finding out the truth. Being told she's a random nobody whose parents abandoned her doesn't faze her at all. The one thing that's supposed to be her greatest weakness according to this trial was completely forgotten about as soon as she was confronted with it.
So, first of all, that's not what your source says. Your source outright states the quality that is similar, namely the fact that it is intended to be open to interpretation. So, now you're twisting the words of the creator to mean something they don't. Really can't wait for that Kathleen Kennedy segment, by the way. So, let's look at this scene from the perspective of her being in the bargaining stage of grief, like my interpretation. she's reaching into the dark side in order to find answers she's looking for. It is a representation of how much she's willing to give up in order to have some amount of closure. And this is actually a setup for the No One reveal, and also a tease that was important to herself and not those who came before her, with letting go of the past being an overarching theme in the second movie in particular. Alright, but let's operate on the assumption that it is showing her a fear and a weakness. That doesn't even necessarily mean lack of family either. You can represent her fear of being alone, which, while related, makes more sense when the vision is that she sees so much of herself, but no one she can communicate with. It could be a fear of her own power. Notice how she reaches out to touch herself in each iteration during the scene. If we remember her power of seeing memories, maybe she has this hope that she will see memories from her own past that guide her forward. For that matter, that great weakness could be the touch power in and of itself, with her continuing to touch the next iteration of herself, representing how its use has the potential to drive her further and further towards the dark side. And more importantly, even if it is her greatest fear or weakness, the fact that she is seeing herself would more likely indicate that she is the one who's weak to some degree, would it not? The fact that we even have this scene isn't telling of her being an unflawed character at all. If anything, it's an indication that Rey's flaws are so omnipresent that one couldn't even know where to begin. Oh, right, I've also already debunked this with the whole 20 seconds later thing. You're really repetitive. But I keep having to prove you wrong from different angles. It's very annoying, and we have too much video to get through. Editor, can we just speed this along a little bit, please? Thank you.
Kathleen Kennedy was so obsessed with showcasing a strong independent woman in Star Wars, as if there wasn't any already, that she completely forgot how they're supposed to tell a convincing story.
Look, you want me to just jump right into Kathleen Kennedy segment? Alright, I got one for you here, for real. The producer doesn't fucking write the movie. The producer hires the writers. The producer has nominal input on the creative direction of the movie, but is more so the manager than anyone directly involved in the creative process. If Kathleen Kennedy were also a director or writer, then I'd give you that. And I don't mean on The Last Jedi, I mean in general, she's only credited for production. And look, obviously producers likely to have some hand in creative decisions, but it's not their job. So acting like someone who's only a producer in general job description is the primary visionary behind a movie is batshit insane. Especially when you consider the back catalog of work Kathleen Kennedy used in order to get this job. Need I remind you?
There's nothing convincing about Rey. She overcomes any and all adversity that's thrown at her with no real danger to her life.
Alright, cool, so skip screen time.
And for all the idiots saying she can use a lightsaber because she trained with a stick, no. That puny staff is not the same thing as a lightsaber. A lightsaber is not a weapon that you can just pick up and start using like it's a random sword. You have to actually train with a lightsaber for a very long time before you can start using it.
I'll get to you pointing out the training in a second, but bro, how frequently do people just use other people's lightsabers in this series? Fuck, did you forget that Finn uses that lightsaber in the same scene? Are you dumb? But, oh, okay, so here's the thing about the training when it comes to actually being able to activate the lightsaber. It's not actually about the training. The training is irrelevant to being able to pick up and use it. Force sensitivity is way more important than martial training in regards to being able to pick up and fight with a lightsaber. Martial training is, much like with a sword, how technical you are at swinging it. Like, it's like giving birth. You can undergo all the preparation, learn all the breathing exercises, stretch all you want, but if you do not have a vagina, then you're not going to have a baby. But conversely, not preparing for it doesn't stop you from having a baby if you're physically capable of doing it. Now, that's what an abortion was for before the Supreme Court decided to step in. Fuck you guys.
Rey shouldn't be able to freely use a lightsaber just because she was trained with that stupid staff. That's the same thing as saying you can use an FGM-148 Javelin anti-tank missile because you have experience in shooting a pistol.
But you can. You can actually pick it up, figure out how it works, and shoot it. Can we move on to Luke at the very least, please? Oh, by the way, another reason your argument is dog shit.
Alright, I've been stuck on this topic for a very long time now, so let's just move on to the next segment.
Thank you! Spoilers, he talks about Luke for longer.
And now it's time to talk about the man of the hour himself, Luke Skywalker. And I think the nicest way to start this off is to say that Rian Johnson clearly had no idea what he was doing here. But we need to take a moment to get a more clear idea for how this element of the film failed. It's not just a matter of how Rian wrote Luke in this movie, it's also a matter of how Rian doesn't seem to understand or know anything about him in the slightest. He had no understanding of what it was that made him such a beloved character amongst fans of the series. There's this recent tweet where he was asked if he was considering Anakin's ghost showing up to talk to Luke at the burning of the tree, and this was how he responded, briefly during the tree burning scene. But Luke's relationship was with Vader, not really Anakin, which seemed like it would complicate things more than the moment allowed. Yoda felt like the more impactful teacher for that moment.
Holy fuck you.
Stank pussy hoe!
And it's at this moment that I'm fully convinced that he did not bother to watch any of the previous movies before working on this one. Seriously, imagine being this stupid that you don't understand even the most fundamental basics of the character you were representing here. There are just so many things wrong with this tweet that to thoroughly explain every single contradiction would require its own video. The only thing I can think of that would be equally stupid would be to like this tweet unironically. I can understand going with Yoda as the more wise and experienced character to talk to Luke. That's not the problem. What is the problem is that the relationship between Luke Skywalker and his father Anakin, one of the most widely known elements of the entire franchise, completely went over this guy's head.
Oh, so this isn't some point about feeling Anakin was a better choice, just you not understanding what that means. What it means is that Luke didn't know Anakin Skywalker was anyone but Vader, and it's been established that Anakin's Force Ghost appearance is based on him pre-Vader. Like, if he thought they were separate characters, why the fuck would he even bring up Vader when someone asks him about Anakin? He wasn't strictly talking about a biological relationship, but rather about an emotional relationship. The only Anakin that Luke ever interacted with was Vader. That's what his tweet was getting at.
I swear to God, this is one of those movies where the more you look into it, the more and more things that you find that are wrong. Even if you're one of those people who wants to make the argument that Vader and Anakin are two separate characters, Vader wasn't the one that Luke was trying to get through. Luke stated very clearly that it was Anakin he was trying to bring back to the light, because at this point he knew who Vader really was.
But why must you confront him?
Because there is good in him. I felt it. He won't turn me over to the Emperor. I can save him. I can turn him back to the good side.
And if your argument is that they're two separate characters, that just makes this tweet even worse. If Anakin and Vader are two separate characters, then what was the point of Luke trying to prove there was still good in him when everyone else was telling him he was a lost cause? The whole point of the relationship is that Luke was the only one left to see Anakin and Vader. He didn't see Vader as his own person. He was very emotional and left heavily conflicted about it, but he was still willing to see the light in him, which is why he became the greatest Jedi of all time. He found the perfect balance between the teachings of the Jedi and drawing a connection with other people. It was a great father and son storyline. Luke didn't have a relationship with Vader because he could see through the metal suit and see the person within the suit. That's what spoke to Anakin the most, a power with more weight than the Force itself. And Johnson, in his infinite wisdom, is saying it didn't really matter all that much.
You know, this would be a good argument if not for the fact that Luke explicitly calls Anakin who Vader once was. He says there's still light in him and that there's good in him, sure, but he never says that he's not Vader. So, no, your point is still incredibly bunk. Vader can have goodness in him and still be treated as a separate character in the way that Rian is referring to here. Very easily.
This is what happens when you don't research the lore of a heavily established story. I could dedicate this entire segment to just pointing out every single reason why this tweet is so nonsensical, how it perfectly represents how awful his knowledge of the source material is. But we have other matters to attend to, so let's move on.
Yes, less, because I can and will embarrass you with that shit if you do.
To put it simply, Luke's characterization in this movie really doesn't work. And the truth is, it actually could have worked. On paper, it's not really a bad concept. If anything, I really like the idea, need to emphasize the idea, of Luke having certain kinds of flaws even in his old age. An experienced Jedi who knows a lot and holds valuable wisdom but is still prone to making mistakes and errors of judgment. Something that shows that he's not a perfect character. Something that would keep him from being a Mary Sue like Rey, or Gary Stu for the male term. The pieces are actually there to make it work.
A mess.
It actually sounds like a really good idea, but the problem is how the idea was executed. You can come up with whatever idea you want, but you need to have the proper execution to make that idea work. It takes time, planning, A lot of consideration, sometimes multiple rewrites even. Luke's character arc doesn't feel like it had any of those things put into it. The idea was badly executed. It could have worked, but the way it was handled was very careless and it caused more harm than good. It's the same problem with The Last of Us Part 2.
A mess.
It sounds like an idea that could work, but if you remember what smart people have been saying about the story since the leaks came out, you also know that it didn't really go so well. The problem with The Last of Us Part 2's story wasn't the idea itself. The problem was the patient zero for all the other reasons why that game's story sucked shit out of a horse's ass. You might remember what it was the running theme of my review from last year. It's that mainly, the person who executed the idea is a fucking retard.
Bruh. You did all that just to call someone retarded. I really hope the other 30 minutes of this are something substantial, because I'm regretting waking up this morning.
And this is why the people claiming this was an interesting direction to take Luke's character are just spewing shit from their collective mouths. They're not focusing on the writing quality because they're too fixated on the idea. Just the idea of Luke having a dynamic character change where he's not the same person we knew from before. Where Rian Johnson, dare I say, subverted our expectations that he was going to be a mythical, all-knowing master instead of a reclused hermit. You can't just say it's a good idea and stop thinking about it from there. You need to consider how that idea is being placed into the plot, because that's not what Rian Johnson did here. And as a result, there's a ton of holes in how Luke is portrayed here. One of the more infamous examples is when he tosses the lightsaber over his shoulder.
What the hell was that?
Now, aside from this being another example of the movie's horrible sense of humor, this part is actually quite offensive, on a storytelling level and an understanding of Star Wars lore. I previously talked about how this was a really shitty payoff for all the build-up that this was given in the time between The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, but the problems with this scene go deeper than that. By treating the scene where Luke rejects his lightsaber like this, you're shitting on the importance of a Jedi's connection with their lightsaber. It might have been one thing if Luke simply dropped the lightsaber onto the ground, or just let it roll out of his hands. It would get the point across that he's trying to sever his ties with the ways of the Jedi without trying to force more horribly placed comedy into the movie. By going with this over-the-top throwing the lightsaber behind him over his shoulder, you're treating this moment that's supposed to have a dramatic sense of weight to it like a joke. And you're also treating a Jedi's connection with their lightsaber as a prop for this ill-thought-out joke.
Okay, so no, then. So, first of all, just because there's an element of humor involved doesn't mean that the whole thing is a joke. And, in fact, the fact that he throws the lightsaber instead of dropping it or letting it fall in a less active fashion also serves to show how much of a mask his rejection of the Force really is. It shows how he's put up a wall, and something that comes to attack that wall isn't gonna just stick to it and roll down. No, it's gonna crash into it more violently. It serves to display anger at his own past. If he just calmly dropped it, it wouldn't actually serve the purpose of showing how aggressively he's fighting against his connection to the Force as well. So his more crotchety line delivery wouldn't have the same sting.
Throughout the lore, a lightsaber has been described as more than just a weapon. It represents a very special bond between a relic and its owner. Think of it like the wands choosing their wielders from Harry Potter. Whether you're a Jedi or a Sith, the lightsaber is an item that adds to the mystique of the Star Wars universe, with a lot of lore and meaning behind their presence. They have an important link to the Force, and building your own lightsaber is supposed to be a crucial step in one's training. A lightsaber and its wielder develop a really huge bond with each other, like they're actually becoming a part of each other's soul. It's even been said that a lightsaber is a Jedi's life. Spiritually, they forever remain with the person who made them. The lightsaber, by and large, belongs to Anakin. Yes, it was passed on to Luke, but the lightsaber will always belong to Anakin. It belongs to Luke's father. It's a family treasure, an heirloom from the man that he helped so many years ago. And he just tosses it like a piece of garbage.
Yes! Because everything he's ever done in connection with the Force has caused tragedy and death.
The Luke Skywalker that George Lucas created would not do that. Luke would not treat his father's lightsaber like a crumbled piece of paper, under any circumstances. This is not in character for him at all.
Other than just pointing to the fact that your real issue is with the fact that George Lucas isn't the fucking head writer, this is also Luke many years later, and, well, fuck, my explanation earlier did a good job of explaining it. It also wouldn't be in character for him to drop it or let it fall from his hands the way you're talking about it, and this points to another purpose it serves. Luke is very much changed by his experiences between Return of the Jedi and The Last Jedi. He's jaded because of his own failings as a teacher. The balance he had at the end of the original trilogy has washed away over time because of his own mistakes. You even pointing out that he's wise, but still has personal flaws. This shows the audience that you should not expect him to act like the Luke of old. It tells them that this character has seen a drastic shift, and further interactions will explain why that dramatic shift has come about and what it more fully entails. And we're doing all of this over a fucking lightsaber, my guy!
On top of that, each lightsaber color had a unique meaning to it. They represent the personality of the wielder based on the color.
All the more reason why Luke discarding a lightsaber whose color no longer matches his personality makes sense.
The blue one represents protection and guardianship. The wielders of a blue lightsaber are more skilled in sword combat, and they're more aggressive against dark side users. The green one represents thoughtfulness in the wielder. It can symbolize how wise they are. It's why Yoda's saber is a green one. It also represents warriors who specialize in force abilities instead of sword techniques, and they represent Jedi who seek a peaceful solution through negotiation and meditation. It makes the green saber more associated with peace than any other color, and the red saber is a true symbol of those who fight on the dark side of the Force, representing corruption within the wielder. All of their anger, hate, and lust for power are concentrated into the crystal, making them a deadly variation of the saber, capable of having their own living presence and consciousness, and even breaking other lightsabers.
And the purple lightsaber represents Samuel L. Jackson being in this movie and having way too much leeway at contract negotiations.
You can't just take something like that and use it as a prop for a gag. It dilutes the importance of the saber. If you wanted to show Luke rejecting the saber to distance himself from his past, there were less insulting ways you could have done it. There was no reason for this comedic tossing over the shoulder gag.
Let me know when you say something new. Oh, also, this whole part of the video I just covered, complete bullshit, not actually relevant to the lore. It's based on the crystal itself, and in some cases, what you do with the crystal, including with the red ones, where you have to essentially kill the crystal to make it. Oh, right. The part about purple lightsabers is true, too. He should probably give credit to whoever wrote that for him.
Especially when you're asking to be taken more seriously than other movies in the franchise. There's also the matter of Luke having practically no reaction to Han's death. The most we get is him having a wide-eyed blank stare when asking where he is, and that's it. The guy was his best friend, his brother-in-arms in so many battles. You'd think that he would have a stronger and more broken-up reaction to finding out that he was murdered in cold blood by his son.
And that reaction serves the purpose too. Remember, of course, that Luke blames himself for turning Ben to the dark side in the first place. That, and he's been exposed to so much death, including the entire fucking academy he founded, mind you. This also shows his desensitization and detachment from what's going on outside. Something he's forcing onto himself as punishment for his sins. Not that you would know anything about nuanced emotion writing. After all, you're an MLP analyst, so everything needs to be spelled out in movies enough for a 5-year-old to understand every single detail of a scene, right?
But we never see that. The next time we cut to him, he's just sitting there trying to ignore Rey's pleas to come back with her. And then he just goes on his merry way doing daily activities like drinking tit milk out of an alien Dr. Seuss creature, fishing, or just going through a stroll around the fog. And he does all this with no sign of distress and a not giving a shit look on his face. Oh yeah, because that's the reaction that I would have if I just found out my best friend died.
You're not Luke Skywalker. I mean, obviously. See, this is what I meant. If it's not the way you would react, it doesn't matter if it expresses something flawed about the character to you, apparently.
Seriously, where is the emotional impact of finding out that Han Solo was killed? Why doesn't Luke have a strong reaction to this? He knew the guy for what I can assume is the better half of 30 years and he just looks content with the situation. Rey knew the guy for only a couple of hours and she's mourning him more than the guy who should actually be mourning for him. I'm like, what is this? Are you some kind of Ki-Adi-Mundi clone? If your argument is that Luke reacted to his death off screen, that's just a fancy way of saying it didn't actually happen. What, are we using Steven Universe logic now?
Terribly sorry that they didn't show him sobbing uncontrollably on camera. So sorry about that. We'll make sure to have more of that in our fun space movie. Oh, and remember most of Luke's Force training? This isn't fucking 24, dude. Things can happen off camera. Like, I was joking about the 5-year-old bit, but apparently I was aiming too high. You just don't have object permanence yet.
And it definitely doesn't help us get attached to the characters by immediately cutting away from Luke as soon as he asks the question. Why would you cut away from Luke finding out about Han's death so arbitrarily, before we actually see him trying to absorb this shocking information? That's not just bad writing, that's bad editing.
Yes, let's make sure that we show the man crying. We don't need the explanation of everything that happened in the first movie to be shown on camera in order to understand. And the next scene is, once again, a reaction someone would have that's running away from their problems and trying to enforce their own isolation. He hears what she has to say, and notice his response when we cut back immediately after that scene is hopelessness. It's him giving up. The reason we don't see the reaction you think you're looking for is because it doesn't make sense to show a man that's already broken break down. Like, and about that edit, really? He asks where Han is, then we cut to the man who killed him. That works fine as a segue.
You also have his outlook on the Jedi ending, which is really hypocritical considering later scenes. I've actually been told that the "it's time for the Jedi to end" line was something that they made up for the trailer and didn't actually think about how it fit into the story. And I'm willing to believe that because it really doesn't make sense in context. So he hates the Jedi because they allowed the Sith to rise. Okay, that's understandable, but now he wants the Jedi to end, which would allow the Sith to rise. The motivation makes no sense.
Not everything a person comes up with is logical. In fact, his argument is that the way of the Jedi should die because, from his point of view, it's going to create the same pattern of evil over and over again. And about him being a hypocrite later, yeah, that's called character development and realizing you were wrong. It's part of storytelling.
It's like hating the police because they failed to stop a bank robbery, so you want them disbanded, which would increase the rate of bank robberies and other serious crimes.
And then reflecting on it and wanting to restructure the police system instead so they're more effective at preventing bank robberies. Because, you know, that's actually what happens in this movie. Except not with the police.
And speaking of motivation that makes no sense, why did you leave us that map leading to your location if you didn't want to be found? He came to this island to die alone, didn't he? What about the scene where he asks, "How did you find me?" Oh, I don't know. Maybe it had something to do with that map you left behind giving instructions on how to find you.
He didn't actually ask how she found him. He told her to go away repeatedly, but I don't recall even once in the second movie him asking how she found him. Maybe he did in the ending of the first, but at that point, it's because he had no idea who she was rather than because anyone was able to find him.
And it still doesn't make any sense that he's so fixated on hating the Jedi of the past when they had nothing to do with the current situation. Why is he blaming the Jedi when it was his own fault that Kylo ended up the way he did?
Because he also pointed to his own personal example of the same sort of hubris and failure. See, when he speaks about this, it's being in the past gets brought up, and he points it out as something he also cannot overcome because of what happened. Like, did you not pay attention to that scene at all? That was the scene where he first talked about failing Kylo, my dude. Like, hello?
Yes, the Jedi were naive and flawed, but they weren't inherently bad. Wanting their teachings forgotten and erased from existence would only cause more problems. Luke should be smart enough to know this. He's not the kind of person who would want to genocide an entire culture, at least when he's being written by someone who actually has a clue of what he's doing. When he threatens to burn the tree, he's directly playing into the dark side's hands. Yes, he stops himself from doing it, but it shouldn't have happened to begin with. Luke throughout the first and second act of the movie is being irrational and thoughtless in a way that makes no sense for his character, in ways that are done for no reason other than to serve the plot that Rian Johnson thought up in his head.
You do know that you even said this was in character, right? So let's talk again about you talking about the cave scene being a representation of fear and weakness in Luke, and by how your interpretation, it was him becoming like Vader and going down a path of self-destruction. This is that path of self-destruction. He was a step away from becoming Vader in Return of the Jedi, and he was a step away from becoming his father, you know, by murdering all the younglings in his backstory for this trilogy. He's falling down this path, and that's why he's making destructive decisions. So, no, it's actually not out of character at all. It's just a direction you don't like because it doesn't line up with your fucking happy ending of the original trilogy. Get the fuck over yourself! And yes, of course, no one is allowed to think something that they decide against on further consideration. You're basically berating a guy with suicidal thoughts instead of helping talk him off the roof.
I'm not saying that Luke can't have these traits, but it has to be in character.
Okay, so you're not saying he can't have these character traits. Just that these character traits don't line up with his character. So, you know, you're saying that he shouldn't have these traits just with different wording. Right, got it. Understood.
This is not in character. The Luke who matured and grew by the end of the OT would not be this stupid and careless.
And people don't stop maturing and growing at the end of the movie. They can also regress or develop new flaws over time. That's what's happened here. See, if this took place even 10 years after the OT, I might agree with you. This is a much bigger gap, though, with more opportunity for a character to be completely different. The fact that you can understand people looking at Anakin and Vader as two different characters, in spite of the fact that they are literally the same person, proves you know this to be the case.
Removing the side that's viewed as the good side would allow the evil side to thrive, which really isn't a good idea when you have mass-killing nutcases like Kylo and the First Order conquering the galaxy.
Unless, of course, you'd rather just end a cycle of violence that feels inevitable, because the more you look into it, the more you realize it keeps fucking happening, and the best way to end it is to let one side win. Like, you know, that.
There's this one scene where Luke talks to Rey about the old Jedi and how they failed, but instead of focusing on that, they abruptly shift to talking about how Luke failed to keep Kylo from the dark side. I'm really not kidding here. They reference the old Jedi for a total of 20 seconds. Just 20 seconds. Fans of the movie praise this scene as the moment that finally called out the Jedi Order for their hypocrisy and bullshit, and whenever I see someone doing that, I just think to myself, where the hell have you been? What did you think the prequel trilogy was about? Were you actually paying attention to what was going on? This 20-second reference by Luke does nothing to explain how they were flawed, what those flaws were, or how they led to Palpatine's rise to power. He just briefly mentions it as a past thing without any context.
As I stated before, we already know all the hows and whys of what happened from the prequels. We don't need every little detail, and this turns into a debate. It transitions more towards present topics as Luke shows himself to not be immune to that hubris. Oh, and about the next scene.
If you want to say that it's appreciated to see a character within the canon acknowledge something that fans have been saying for years, that's not good enough.
It's not good enough to be willing to say the Jedi are hypocrites and that they're overly controlling. You have to have a 3.5-hour movie that's a TED Talk on why, in your view, the Jedi are evil. Go fuck yourself.
If you want to have a scene of Luke educating Rey about the failures of the Jedi, then have a scene of Luke educating Rey about the failures of the Jedi.
By relating his own failures as a Jedi Master? Did you stop paying attention after he stopped talking about Sidious?
What was the purpose of this 20-second reference if they do nothing with it? If it does nothing to fuel the story? It's nothing but cheap nostalgia baiting.
Except it transitions towards a discussion of why Luke's mindset has changed. It sets up the conversation about why Luke isn't the same hero from the original trilogy. It doesn't need to be a TED Talk. It can be part of a larger scene.
Which is one of the main problems with the sequel trilogy as a whole. But let's move on to other issues, because now we're gonna talk about what I can already tell is a fun topic for people to revisit. Luke considering murdering Kylo in his sleep. The guy who was willing to redeem the biggest mass murderer and most feared tyrant in the galaxy was about to murder someone in their sleep who did absolutely nothing wrong yet, just because Snoke was already influencing him.
Have you ever heard the phrase, like father, like son? This movie does a good job of explaining that Luke, at this point, was downright paranoid about the dark side. He is, in fact, also the son of Vader, someone who fell all the way on the other side of the dark side, and Luke himself is someone depicted as having struggled with the dark side from the second movie onwards. You expect that his struggles with his inner demons just go away with Return? No, of course not. And his considering killing Ben is a big part of that, with the justification of fighting against the dark side being something to shroud what's really going on in his head. And it was a fear of the dark side that led him here, just the same way the line goes. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to the dark side. It does for Luke, and it does for Ben as well. But back to the initial like father, like son analogy. This is actually a rhyme with the original movies. Yes, I'm complimenting the rhyming thing, because sometimes it's done well. Anakin was convinced of the evil of the Jedi and killed apprentices in cold blood. Luke came very close to mirroring that, only to enable that reality to occur with Ben. In fact, in a sense, Luke was mirroring Mace Windu in this transition to the dark side. He was the one about to take down what he was convinced was pure evil. In other words, your whole complaint about it being in character doesn't really fly. Is it not in character for Luke's fear or anger to take over his actions in the heat of the moment? Yes. Is it in character for him to find himself on the edge of the dark side only to pull himself back at the last possible moment? Also, very much yes. So, why is this incident of exactly that not allowed to be in character? Right, I forgot. Because you don't like it. Honey.